My parents told me they were going out of town and that I should stay home for a quiet weekend. I didn't think much of it until I saw photos online of them hosting a huge party with all our relatives and not a single invite for me. When they finally called to apologize, saying it was complicated, I was left wondering if I could ever trust them again. Hi, everyone. I'm 27F, and I've been holding this in for a while. I wasn't sure if posting would help or just make me feel more exposed, but the weight of what happened is too heavy to keep to myself anymore. I still don't know how to process it all. Maybe writing it out will bring some clarity. Let me give you some context before I jump into the weekend that changed everything. I'm an only child, born to two parents who, from the outside, seem like the picture of stability. My mom, Joran, is a retired school administrator who always insists on having the final say in every conversation. My dad, Lyle, works in finance, and let's just say he has never once missed an opportunity to talk about discipline, image, and how appearances are everything. Growing up, our house was immaculate. Not because we were wealthy, though we were definitely comfortable, but because my mom needed everything to look perfect for anyone who might drop by. Neighbors, relatives, former coworkers, church friends, anyone. We were the family with coordinated holiday cards, a manicured front lawn, and matching outfits for church events. Behind closed doors, though, it was a different story. My role in the family has always been quiet. Not unimportant, but quiet. I was the kid who got good grades, didn't cause trouble, and followed the rules. You'd think that would make things easier, but it just made me easier to ignore. I wasn't dramatic or loud like my cousin Mira, or a high achiever in the traditional sense like my older cousin Theo, who went to law school and is basically my dad's favorite even though he's not even his kid. I studied digital design and now work as a remote UX designer. I like my job. I'm proud of what I've built, but my parents never really understood it. They still ask me if I'm looking for something more stable, as if I haven't been paying all my bills myself since I was 22. I live about 25 minutes away from my childhood home in my own apartment. I see my parents maybe once or twice a month for dinner. The conversations are polite, usually a little surface level. They ask if I've met anyone. I haven't. How work is going, fine, and what my long-term plans are. I used to try to give real answers, but over time I realized they weren't really listening. Now, onto the part that still has me reeling. About 2 months ago, my parents called me on a Wednesday evening. My mom said they'd decided to go out of town that weekend to get some air and clear their heads. She said they'd been feeling cooped up and needed a little escape. My dad chimed in and added, "We thought you might enjoy a quiet weekend. Maybe treat yourself, decompress. You've been working so hard." That actually made me smile. I remember thinking, wow, they're trying. So I thanked them, said I'd probably just read and maybe catch up on my favorite show. They didn't mention where they were going. I didn't push. Friday came and went uneventfully. I made myself dinner, cleaned my apartment, and didn't think much of it. Saturday afternoon, I went for a long walk and then came home to shower. When I checked my phone around 6 p.m., I noticed that my cousin Lena had posted something to her story and tagged several family members. It was a boomerang of people clinking glasses in a familiar-looking garden. I paused it, squinted. Then I realized why it looked so familiar. It was our backyard. I blinked a few times, confused. Maybe it was an old clip? Maybe she just liked the lighting from a past event? But then I saw it. Uncle Hal in the background wearing a navy shirt with this huge embroidered hawk on it. I'd seen that same shirt in a photo he'd just posted a few hours earlier. The caption read, "Beautiful night with beautiful people." I clicked through more stories. Mira dancing by the string lights my mom had once banned me from touching because I wasn't careful enough. My dad laughing with a plate of food in his hand. My mom in a pale blue dress that I'd never seen before, holding my baby cousin like she was the world's warmest grandmother. And me? Nowhere. Not even a mention. For a few moments, I thought maybe it was just a dinner. Maybe they planned it last minute and forgot to tell me. But that didn't explain the decorations, the catering setup, or the fact that they lied to me about being out of town. That's when it hit me. They didn't forget. They excluded me. I didn't call or text them right away. I sat on my bed, scrolling, watching, listening to the laughter and music through a screen. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not just by my parents, but by everyone there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I'd grown up seeing at every holiday dinner, every birthday, every family reunion. Not one of them asked where I was. Not one of them thought to reach out. I tried to go to sleep early that night. I couldn't. I kept picturing their faces, the way my mom beamed when she talked about family, the way my dad always said family is loyalty. I guess that only applies if you fit the image they want to project. The next morning, I got up early, still hoping it was a misunderstanding. I texted my mom something simple. Hope you guys are having a nice time away. Just saw some photos. Didn't realize you were hosting something? No answer. Hours passed. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, folding laundry, even baking, which I never do. Still nothing. At around 6 p.m., my dad finally called. Hey, sweet pea. He said in that voice he uses when he's trying to act like everything's fine. Just saw your message. Things got a little complicated. That word again. Complicated. I asked him directly why I wasn't invited. There was a pause. Then he said, there were some concerns that it might not be the best environment for you. Confused, I asked, what kind of concerns? He dodged. Said something about tensions with Uncle Hal. Something about how they wanted the evening to be light and focused on moving forward. I realized what he meant. A few months back, I'd gotten into a disagreement with Uncle Hal at another gathering. He'd made a comment about how some people think working on a computer from their couch is a real job. And I'd responded, not even rudely, by saying, that's an outdated view, and I'm doing just fine. That was it. Apparently, that was enough to get me excluded from the next big family event. I didn't yell. I didn't even argue. I just said, okay, and hung up. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay awake replaying the phone call, every word, every pause, the way my father's voice stayed so carefully even, like he was trying to manage a client instead of his daughter. There were some concerns. Not the best environment. That's how he talked about me. It would have hurt less if he'd just admitted it outright, that I didn't fit the image, that I didn't serve the narrative they wanted to present to everyone else. But instead, he cloaked it in vague justifications, as if I were some disruptive variable in their perfectly arranged equation. When I woke up Monday morning, I felt numb. I called in sick to work, not because I was actually sick, but because my brain couldn't seem to function. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop, unable to type more than 2 sentences without drifting into thought. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? That's when I started digging. At first, I just wanted to see how far back this had gone. Was this one party? Was it a fluke? But the deeper I went, the more I started to question things I'd previously dismissed as harmless or coincidental. I went back through social media. Not just my parents' profiles. Those were always clean and curated, but my cousins, my aunts, my uncles' wives. And slowly, a pattern began to form. Photos of brunches I wasn't invited to. Baby showers I hadn't even heard about. A group trip to the mountains last fall that I'd never known took place, until I saw my mom in the background of someone else's photo, smiling beside Mira and Lena. These weren't just social oversights. This was deliberate, ongoing. It was like I'd slowly been phased out of the family without anyone telling me. I remembered something Mira had said to me during our last real conversation, about 6 months ago. We'd bumped into each other at a grocery store, and she'd been polite, but there was something clipped about her tone. At one point, she asked, so, are you still doing that computer thing? Or have you found a real job yet? I'd laughed it off at the time, told her I was still working in UX design. She'd nodded, distracted, like she was already moving on in her head. Now I realized that wasn't just rudeness. That was condescension, something she probably picked up straight from my parents. You'd think that realization would bring clarity, but it just raised more questions. What did they say about me when I wasn't around? What story were they telling the family? And that's when I remembered something strange. Months earlier, my mother had asked me if I'd mind taking down a photo I'd posted on my Instagram. It was just me working from a cafe, my laptop open, a croissant in front of me. She said it didn't reflect well on me to post that kind of thing. When I asked what she meant, she got vague, saying things like, it just makes it look like you don't take things seriously. At the time, I assumed she was just being her usual overly concerned self. But now, it felt different. Now it felt like she was curating me out of the family's image. That night, I called Lena. We're not close, not really. She's always been more of Myra's friend, but I needed to hear someone else's voice. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear music in the background. Hey, this is a surprise, she said, cautious. I just wanted to ask something, I said quietly. About the party. There was a pause. Yeah. Did you know I wasn't invited? She hesitated. That was all I needed to know. I just assumed, she finally said. Your parents said you had something going on that weekend. They told me they were leaving town. Another pause. Then, almost nervously, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. I just thought maybe you didn't want to come. That stung more than I expected. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd painted me as someone who chose not to be there. I didn't blame Lena. Not really. But it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit until then. My parents were lying to other people about me, making excuses, inventing reasons for my absence. They weren't just shutting me out. They were rewriting the narrative to make themselves look like the reasonable ones. After we hung up, I went digging again. This time, deeper. There's a private Facebook group for our extended family, something my Aunt Liv created years ago to share photos, coordinate get-togethers, and post updates about the older relatives. I rarely check it. Most of the time, it's baby photos and casserole recipes. But now I was looking for something else. I started scrolling back, way back, and that's when I saw it. A post from 3 weeks before the party, written by my mom. So excited to host a celebration at our home later this month. It's been such a hard year for so many, and we feel deeply grateful for the strength of our family bond. Looking forward to seeing all of you. In the comments, a few people asked about dates and RSVPs. My mom responded promptly, even joked with Aunt Renee about finally showing off the new garden lights. The entire family had known, and not a single person had thought to ask why I wasn't in the loop. I stared at that post for a long time. My hands were cold. I kept reading the words family bond over and over again. What kind of bond was this? I thought about calling them again. I really did. But what was I going to say? Why did you erase me from my own family? I already knew what their answer would be. Something polished. Something rehearsed. Something that made it sound like I was the problem. Instead, I started writing. Not this post, just notes. Things I remembered. Moments I'd brushed off. Times I was told not to bring up uncomfortable topics at dinner. Times I was left out of photos, gently nudged away so they could get just the cousins or just the immediate family. Slowly, a picture started forming, and it was uglier than I wanted to admit. They didn't just exclude me once. This was a long, slow exile, hidden under politeness and plausible deniability. But here's the thing. If they wanted me gone from their version of the family, fine. I could accept that. But I wasn't going to let them lie about why. And I wasn't going to keep playing along, pretending not to notice. So I started preparing something. I didn't want to react out of anger. I'd done that before, in smaller moments, and every time I had, my parents found a way to twist it. If I brought up how something they said hurt me, I was overly sensitive. If I asked why I was left out of a gathering, I was trying to start drama. If I pointed out how they favored other family members, I was making everything about myself. I wasn't going to give them that narrative again. Not this time. So I got quiet, but not passive. I started by organizing everything I'd collected: screenshots, timestamps, invitations, posts, messages. Every piece that showed a clear pattern of exclusion. Every time they'd omitted me, lied about me, or twisted the story. It wasn't just the party anymore. It was the birthday I hadn't been invited to last March. The family group photo from Thanksgiving 2 years ago where they'd cropped me out. The time I found out about Myra's graduation celebration 3 weeks after it happened, held at my parents' house. At some point, I stopped feeling sad and started feeling focused. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make them see the version of me they'd tried to ignore. The version that remembered everything. My opportunity came 3 weeks later. My Aunt Liv, the one who manages the family Facebook group, sent out a message. There would be a big family lunch to celebrate my grandfather's 80th birthday. It would be held at a nearby country hall. Casual, outdoors, catered. I wasn't tagged directly in the post, but the guest list included all the immediate and extended family members. No one had messaged me personally. Again, but I RSVP'd anyway. Then, I made a few quiet preparations. I created a small printed booklet. It wasn't flashy, just a neat, simple layout with about 12 pages. I titled it, What I Missed, by Invitation Only. Inside, I included select screenshots of party photos, quotes from posts and messages that excluded me, and short, dated captions underneath each one. I wasn't sarcastic. I didn't rant. I simply presented the timeline, like a little museum exhibit of my erasure. On the last page, I added a personal note. If you're wondering why you haven't seen me much lately, I hope this explains it. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. and I've decided I'm no longer pretending I don't notice. I printed 30 copies. Just enough. I also printed one letter, just for my parents. A longer one. I won't paste the whole thing here, but the ending said, "You spent so much energy curating the perfect image that you edited your own daughter out of the frame. I hope your party was worth it." When the day of the lunch came, I showed up early. The weather was nice, sunny, not too warm. The venue was one of those garden-style halls with a white canopy and long picnic-style tables arranged under hanging lights. There were name cards at each table. There wasn't one for me. Of course, I didn't say anything. I found an empty seat near the back, one that didn't have a name. I sat down and waited. People started arriving in clusters. Mira waved awkwardly. Lena avoided eye contact. Uncle Hal gave me a nod, but didn't stop to chat. My parents came in around noon. My mom looked radiant in pale green. My dad wore a crisp shirt and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When they saw me, they visibly froze. But I smiled. After everyone had settled and lunch was being served, I stood up quietly and began walking from table to table. At each one, I handed out a booklet. I didn't explain. I didn't comment. I just smiled, handed it over, and moved on. Some people flipped through it immediately. Others looked confused. A few started whispering. When I reached the head table, where my parents were sitting with my grandfather, I placed the longer letter envelope in front of them and said, softly but clearly, "This is for you." My mother looked up with a tight smile. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I walked back to my seat. I saw Mira flip through the booklet, her expression shifting from amusement to discomfort. Aunt Renee whispered something to her husband and kept glancing over at me. Uncle Hal frowned, then passed his copy to someone else. I didn't watch my parents read theirs. I didn't need to. I knew they would. And I knew they'd recognize every single screenshot, every date, every phrase. By the time dessert was served, there was a noticeable shift in the air. Conversations were quieter. Some people were clearly uncomfortable. A few looked at me like they didn't know what to say, and that was fine. I hadn't done this to make a scene. I'd done it so they'd finally see what they'd all played a part in, whether actively or passively. As people began to leave, a few cousins came over. One of them, Elise, who I'd always thought of as neutral, said quietly, "I didn't know it was that bad." "I'm sorry." I just nodded. "It's okay. I'm not angry anymore. I just needed the truth to be seen." When I got home that evening, I put my phone on silent. I didn't want to read any explanations or reactions. I'd said what I needed to say in the clearest way I knew how. But the next morning, I woke up to 5 missed calls. 3 from my mom, 2 from my dad. A handful of messages followed. "Mom, we need to talk." That was completely inappropriate. "Dad, you ambushed your family at your grandfather's birthday. This wasn't the place." "Mom, this is not how mature people handle things. You embarrassed us." And then, one message that finally cut through the noise. "Lena, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but thank you. I've been feeling pushed aside too, and seeing you do that made me realize I'm not imagining things." I didn't respond. I didn't respond to my parents' messages right away. I let them sit in silence for a few days, long enough for the discomfort to settle in, for the weight of what I'd shown them to start pressing down where it hurt most, their image. Because that's what this was really about for them. Not me, not family, optics. But what they didn't realize was that I hadn't just been documenting their social exclusion. I'd been collecting everything for months, even before the party. Things that didn't make sense at the time, but had always left a strange taste in my mouth. The deeper betrayal started with my college fund. When I was younger, my grandfather had set up savings accounts for all his grandchildren. He'd been a quiet, generous man, never flashy, but he believed in education and wanted each of us to have a solid start. He passed away when I was in my early 20s, just after I graduated. I'd never touched the account. I'd gotten scholarships and small part-time jobs to get through school. My plan had been to use what was left to help with grad school or maybe a down payment someday. A few months ago, while I was organizing old paperwork, I realized I hadn't received a statement from that account in years. I tried logging in through the online banking portal. Locked. I called the bank. After a long verification process, they told me the account had been closed 3 years ago. Closed. By then, I was already suspicious. But hearing it out loud made something twist in my chest. When I requested a transaction history, they said I'd need to submit a written inquiry. I did. And when the report finally arrived 2 weeks later, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it for over an hour. The account had been emptied over the course of a year. Small, staggered withdrawals, some labeled as family needs, others as household support. The signature on the request forms? My father's. He'd been listed as a co-trustee on the account. It wasn't illegal, but it was unethical, and it explained a lot about why they'd suddenly insisted I delay grad school and get some experience first. They told me it was practical. They said it was about maturity. Meanwhile, that money had gone toward redoing their kitchen, paying off Myra's student debt, and helping Mira put a down payment on a condo. My name was nowhere. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I sat there in the quiet and reread the report 3 times. They hadn't just excluded me from parties. They had stolen from me and masked it as parenting. That's when I decided I was done playing games. I made another booklet. Not a subtle one this time. Not something to quietly pass around a picnic table. This one was for my lawyer. I compiled the bank statements, the co-trustee paperwork, the text messages, the emails where my parents referenced using some of the college money to help Mira with her first big step. I wrote a clear, calm letter outlining what had happened, how I had never been notified, and how I had never consented to the account being closed. My lawyer was thorough. She read every document, asked 100 questions, and told me something that made my stomach churn. It's unlikely you'll recover all of it, but we can push for a formal complaint and make this very uncomfortable for them. And I said, good. Within a month, my parents received a letter from her office. At first, they didn't respond directly to me, but I knew they'd read it, because suddenly, I wasn't just being contacted by them. I was being called by family members I hadn't heard from in years. Your parents are heartbroken. They just want to talk. Is this really necessary? Necessary. They took my future and handed it to Mira like a favor. They erased me from gatherings, from conversations, from memories. And when I finally pushed back, I was the one causing problems? No, this was long overdue. My lawyer proceeded with the complaint. The bank confirmed that while they couldn't reverse what had been done, they could acknowledge a breach of fiduciary duty by my father, given the co-trustee terms were not honored in good faith. The paper trail was damning. To avoid escalation, my parents settled privately. They didn't apologize. They didn't explain. Through a formal agreement, they transferred a restitution amount, about 70% of what had been withdrawn, back to me. Not as a gift, not as a favor, as a debt repaid. I took that money and finally applied for the graduate program I'd been putting off. I got in. I started in the fall. I moved out of the city a few weeks ago. Found a small, quiet place near the coast. Somewhere with long walks and wide skies. Somewhere they wouldn't think to find me. I didn't tell anyone in the family where I was going. I deleted the family Facebook group. Blocked my parents. Blocked Mira. I kept Lena unblocked. Not because I forgave her, but because I sensed she, too, had been caught in the machine. I don't miss the birthdays. I don't miss the passive-aggressive texts or the carefully worded emails. I don't miss having to wonder whether I was wanted or merely tolerated. What I do miss, sometimes, is the illusion. The version of my family I used to believe in. The version where I thought I mattered, where love wasn't conditional on performance or appearance. That version never really existed. But grieving it took time. Now, I'm not angry. I'm free. I no longer look over my shoulder waiting for an invitation that won't come or a compliment that's just a setup for a jab. I don't have to ask why anymore. I know. And I'm done letting villains rewrite the story just because they call themselves family.